Hello, everyone, and welcome to our June 21st Coffee Shop webinar for .org Solutions. We're so glad you're with us on the call today. And for those of you who are in Ohio, hopefully you're enjoying a wonderful day like we are. So hope we didn't have to grab you from the outside to bring you in for the webinar, but we promise it's going to be a great hour with our guest today, the Data Dames. So if you could just please confirm that you can hear us by just doing a quick wave in the chat box, we'd really appreciate that. All right, great. Well, as we are getting started here, I just want to kind of go through a few quick details before we get started and talk about our .org Cafe professional development opportunities and coffee shop webinars. So our coffee shop webinar today is one of our many .org Cafe professional development opportunities that we produce free for nonprofits, just to kind of help them do things a little bit better. We have our coffee shop webinars along with our coffee break newsletter that comes out monthly and our weekly blogs that we talk about a variety of topics relevant to the nonprofit space. So our goal today with our webinar is to just really be really informative and provide you with information that you may not have had before, but also be relatable at the same time. So when we choose our speakers, we really just have conversations as part of these webinars, and hopefully, you'll learn a few things today that you can put to use right away. And we also just want to make sure that if you had questions along the way, that we would love for you to be able to ask them. So the format of our webinar today, for those of you who might be new to our coffee shop webinars, is that we are going to have panelists, and today we'll have two panelists that I will introduce here in a moment, and the moderator, which will be me, and my name is Amy Wong, and I'm president here at .org Solutions. Only the panelists and the moderator will be visible on the call. Everybody else is going to be muted and off video. Today's discussion with our panelists will be a question and answer format, and we thank those of you who submitted questions ahead of time, and hopefully we'll be able to answer those for you. We're going to do our best to address questions also during the session. So if we're actually talking about a particular topic, please feel free to put your questions in right then. We want to make sure that we're answering them as we're talking about those particular topics. We will also have the chat box and the Q&A enabled so that if you do have questions during the session that you can ask those. So, and then we'll have 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the session specifically to answer any questions that, that may come up during the webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully everybody that is joining us has been able to log in and be with us. And so I want to get to this, and we're going to introduce our speakers here in just a minute. But really, we want to talk about data, and measuring the effectiveness of your nonprofit's digital marketing can really give you a lot of information that's going to help you with your marketing strategy and the things that you're doing. So it helps you know what's working and what's not working. And that data can also help you understand your constituents and your donors better. So it'll help you talk about, evaluate your own marketing campaigns and then create personalized strategies. Because I think all of us now are really looking for that personal connection with the organizations that we support. And data can help us a lot to be able to figure out how to do that. The problem with data is that sometimes if you don't understand what it means, it's very, very hard to know what exactly to do with it. Is something performing well? Is it not performing well? What matters? What doesn't matter as much? And then how do you actually take all that data and improve your marketing and fundraising efforts? Well, our speakers today are fortunately going to help us understand a lot more about that. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Jen Carroll and Annalisa Hilliard, and they're marketing strategy consultants with Data Dames Marketing. And Annalisa and Jen both have a lot of years experience in marketing, and most recently starting their company, the Data Dames. They have a wide range of experience in creating and implementing and measuring marketing for clients, and also have a wealth of experience in both analytics and marketing implementation and content. Just to tell you a little bit about them personally, I'm going to embarrass them a little bit because I know them well enough to be able to do this. But when Annalisa is not, I said dabbling in data, I had to have a little fun alliteration there because she does more than dabble in data. She lives data. But she spends her spare time reading, listening to podcasts, advocating for social justice issues, and spending time outdoors. I heard she's also a pretty good mixologist too, and likes to try to be an amateur bartender. And then Jen also spends her time reading, and I found this out about her. Every 5 years likes to read the Tolkien trilogy every 5 years, so that's quite a commitment. Loves 80s music. I knew we were friends when I read that. And then also spending time outdoors. So with that, I would like to introduce Jen Carroll and Annalisa Hilliard, the Data Dames. So welcome today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. Thanks, Amy. We could embarrass you too, but we won't.
Well, you know, this is our webinar. You don't get to embarrass us on our own webinar, maybe on your podcast.
Yes.
So why don't we just go ahead and get started? Because, you know, as I mentioned in the introduction, that there is a lot to talk about when we talk about data. And so we could probably spend the next months really getting a deep dive into data. So maybe we should just start with kind of the simplest question. It's like, why should nonprofits actually care about their data and their analytics?
Yeah, so obviously, you know, traditional marketing has been important to businesses for forever. And digital marketing has been important mostly in the last 10 years. It's really gained traction. And I would say even more so with the pandemic and how things played out. And so, yeah, data is super important for you to look at, to analyze, and especially because you have limited time and resources, and you want to make sure that you're using your resources wisely.
And I would add to that, coming from a nonprofit organization. I worked most recent before we started our company. I worked for Mercy Medical Center for 7 years, and a contractor long before that. But, you know, I know, again, already mentioned limited time and resources. And I think that already puts nonprofits at a disadvantage, because data analysis does take some time and energy and knowledge. And I feel like a lot of times you're just trying to juggle a lot of things. So that's why we're talking today.
So, you know, Annalisa, you did mention, and we referenced this, I know, in some things that we've done in written and also in our last webinar, that the pandemic changed a lot about digital. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess obviously, you know, we're on this call on a Zoom webinar where like pre-pandemic, we would probably be in person. And so it's forced us online even more than we were prior to. And, you know, that kind of parallels with your marketing efforts as well. More people are looking for your services online. And so it's super important to have a presence that people can find and engage with.
And not just find, but, you know, sift through the noise as well, because people are online so much more. It's going to be all that much more difficult to get your donors' attention, or, you know, or even, you know, if getting volunteers is, you know, of key importance to you, then again, just difficult time getting people's attention now.
So, and I would agree with that. I mean, you start to see people of all ages that, you know, you think of certain demographics that may not have traditionally been reached through digital means, and you're starting to see that a lot more now. So you would see a lot of older generations or people who weren't typically online looking for things that are now looking for them. So, you know, they're looking for your nonprofit too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
So what kinds of data analytics should nonprofits know and understand?
Well, I guess I would reframe that a little bit by saying, where should you be looking at data? What mediums? And so obviously, you know, your website probably comes to mind. Other things that you can collect data on and analyze would be email and social media. There's probably...
I mean, we know obviously some nonprofits do use Google Ads, and that can be, that you can obviously collect data about your advertising as well.
Right. So we'll get into the tools a little bit later, I know, in our conversation, but all right, Amy, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to say, so mainly, I mean, if we're thinking of like kind of the three main areas of digital that nonprofits probably will want to dive into, that would be like your web, email, and social.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's easy to say, sure, let's just look at our website, email, and social media data. And, you know, we have reams of it that we can look through, and things on Google Analytics, we have no idea what it is. So when we're talking about this data in a digital sense, what actually is it? Because there's mounds of it.
Yeah. And lots of jargon as well.
Yeah, so the great thing obviously about data is, you know, access to it and your ability to collect a lot of it, but that's also the challenge. Mm-hmm. So I would say two of the main categories that we would break it down into that are pretty key are your conversion data and your engagement metrics. And so some of those would be, so for conversions, we typically like to talk about micro and macro conversions. And so micro are going to be your smaller conversions, maybe like people signing up for a newsletter or staying on your site for a certain amount of time, or
watching a
video, engaging in a certain way. And your macro conversions are going to be your big ones, a donation,
volunteer sign up.
A volunteer sign up, thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so
or an event, maybe even an event, attending an event.
Right.
Possibly.
Yeah, so breaking it down into micro and macro conversions is something that's important, because a lot of times your micro conversions, you'll kind of see leading up to that macro conversion, you'll see increase in micro conversions. And so it's important to track both of them, because you can have progress, you know, on one side before you have progress on another, and it can kind of, it's not causation, but it can definitely give you an idea of whether your efforts are making traction.
Yeah, and you know, and oftentimes if they're, you know, if it's, you know, it's additional data to show that you're either being effective in what you're doing or not. In between, you know, the bigger conversions, it's more evidence that, you know, you either are doing the right things or maybe you need to pivot. So specifically talking about micro conversions and tracking them.
So, you know, if I, you know, am kind of new to this whole data thing, conversion is like, what exactly is that? What exactly, I mean, we're talking micro and macro, and it's, you know, program sign up. What are you converting from? I mean, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so, you know, conversions are really, you know, what is the goal? What are some of your goals? What is the end game to those goals? What are we putting all of our efforts, you know, why are we doing these things? And obviously, you know, yes, conversion and engagement are both important, but, you know, you also have to consider your user and whether you're reaching them. And that goes a lot into like messaging, and whether you are speaking the language that your audience can relate to and to grab onto. And so
maybe you're kind of talking a little bit about conversion optimization. So I don't know if it's helpful to, you know, I mean, obviously defining the term conversion is people complete a goal that you want them to complete. Again, a donation would be a macro conversion versus, you know, watching a video is, you know, a micro conversion, but you'd like them to watch a video, you'd like them to donate. You know, that's kind of what we mean. Did that help, Amy, like defining that a little better? Or
so I guess I'm wondering, so like I'm thinking, so what do you get to that point? So maybe it's like, okay, we send out a social media post that has a video on it. So the goal of the social media post is for somebody to watch the video. That's a conversion, right? I mean, so you send out you're sending out an email. The email has a donation link in it. Somebody clicks on the donation link. is a first conversion, but the second conversion would actually be them being on a website and actually going through the donation. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, and one of the micro conversions would be actually even opening the email, right? So that's like on your email platform, you typically have that kind of data where you can see in an open rate, and we would consider that a conversion.
And we're going to talk through some of this. I just wanted to kind of, as we started out, have people understand like they're, you know, what exactly does conversion mean? Because I think that's a relatively new, for especially some smaller nonprofits. It's or nonprofits that haven't really done much in the digital marketing space. It's kind of a new concept, and just being able to understand that was a good way to go. So let's talk a little bit about engagement, because engagement is kind of, we've got conversions and we have engagement. So let's talk about engagement a little bit now and what that means. Not putting a ring on somebody's finger.
Right, it's a little squishier.
Yeah, so some of the engagement metrics that you can find in Google Analytics, and again, we'll kind of get to the tools that we use on a regular basis, but a lot of the engagement data you'll see is like, I think I mentioned before, more in the micro conversion category of like how long someone stayed on your site, how many pages they visited when they were on your site, if they watched a video, if they clicked on a call to action, like Amy, you were saying, like donate or sign up to volunteer. And that's one conversion. And then, as you said, like the actual submitting a donation or a volunteer application, that's another conversion. So when you look at conversion like that, you can say, okay, well, like maybe X number of people, let's say 10 people clicked on the button, but only 5 people donated. And then, you know, you can analyze like, well, why might that be, you know?
And like talking about engagement versus the conversions, that you're likely to have a lot more engagement, would you say, than conversion?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially I would think with nonprofits, you're trying to engage your audience so that they become a donor, or maybe they become a regular donor. And so a lot of times it's the little things along the way of the big donation or the signing up to volunteer with your organization.
I think in the past we've had some clients who get a little bit fixated on bounce rates. I don't know, maybe I think it's a good idea to mention that because it's, you know, kind of prominent when people log into the data.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about bounce rate, and that's certainly, you know, something to pay attention to. I would say more on a page level than when you open Google Analytics and you look at a report, it'll give you a page by page bounce rate, but it'll also give you an overall bounce rate. And so, I mean, depending on the content of the page, like if it's just a page, maybe an about page, you might expect a higher bounce rate than like a page where you want people to engage or spend time on, you want that bounce rate to be lower. And how they calculate a bounce rate is someone coming to your site and not engaging at all and leaving. So a scroll is even considered engagement. So if they don't scroll, they don't click, they don't do anything, and they leave, then that adds to the bounce rate. So an important metric, but also, yeah, one not to get fixated on, just because, I mean, there are pages of your website where they're just coming to get information, and hopefully the information that they're looking for, they can find without really even scrolling. And that's not a bad thing. If they're looking for, you know, your phone number or they're looking for your address, it would be, you know, something that they could come to your website, get, and leave without engaging. So
yeah,
I think that's really helpful because I think, you know, because of the way Google Analytics is set up and maybe the basic understanding that a lot of people have of it, like they see that bounce rate number and then they directly look at an industry standard number and all of a sudden they're like, our website's terrible, we have to redo it. instead of recognizing the fact that there might be some instances, like you said, Annalisa, they just want your phone number, or they may just want your address, or they may find the download that they specifically needed right away because maybe you have really good SEO, you know.
A good way to kind of look at it too is maybe, you know, go back in time and see how that bounce rate has changed. If it's something that like was low and now it's high, well, yeah, something might be wrong with that page. Or it could be the tracking, because every time you set up tracking in Google Tag Manager, I know this is getting a little bit, you know, technical, and I don't want to go down that path too far, but you know, every time you set up a different tag for tracking data, that can affect the bounce rate depending on how you set the tag up. So, you know, there are troubleshooting things that you can do. Looking at your metrics over time can kind of help you with the bigger picture. You know, is it something that's just temporary? Is it something that, wow, it fell a huge amount, you know, or we went from a really high bounce rate to a really low bounce rate, which is great. Just kind of doing some digging.
And you oftentimes have told me, again, that you like to do certain types of comparison with data as opposed to like February to March or whatever, March to September, you know, by month, you like to look at a specific time from the previous year.
Yeah, so I know like a lot of nonprofits have, you know, seasons as far as, you know, maybe certain fundraisers that they do, and it's around the same time every year. So that's why it's good to look, you know, year over year versus month over month, because you might have done something, you know, you might have done a big fundraising event in March, and if you compare it to February, then of course you're going to look at data that's probably way better, and vice versa. If you compare it to the next month and you had a fundraiser last month, you're going to see your data probably, you know, drop a good bit, and then you'll probably be shocked. So that's why definitely, if you have that historical data and in Google Analytics, as long as you've had your analytics installed on your website, you should be able to go back to when that code was installed. So you might have 5 years worth of data. You might have 2, but ideally you would want to compare year over year.
And I think that holds true seasonally for non-fundraising events. I mean, it could hold true for, you know, needs. So maybe we're a nonprofit that had a very large presence or need during the beginning of COVID, and so you may have seen huge spikes in certain pages, which, you know, you're starting to maybe see a leveling off, or you know, huge need for services. So I think you're right. It's and you know, that leveling off tells you a lot of things too. Like we joke as every time, you know, you post a new job, our LinkedIn followers goes way up. So it's kind of nice. But there are those weird spikes where you can automatically start to tell based upon data. So you know, we've talked a lot about website data, but what about like social media data? So, you know, social media data is kind of like that wild frontier. You know, you talk about likes and shares, interactions, impressions. You know, what actually does that information help us do, and what does that tell us?
Well, I think that much like the micro conversions that we were talking about on the website just a little bit ago, I think it's really important to think of social media engagement metrics as similar micro conversions, in that, you know, they are, you know, it's helpful, and if you're tracking them properly, you can discern some of that information that helps you know if you're going in the right direction or, you know, making progress to your goals. But you know, the social media metrics, again, you kind of just rent your space on social media. You do not ever own your presence on social media. So, you know, Facebook and Instagram right now are at war with Apple, and it's changing the metrics, and we have no control over that. We have no control over their algorithms. We have no control over a lot of things on social media. So I think it's always important to like put those metrics into perspective. because, you know, you need to focus on your goals and more on like what you want to accomplish, and are you moving more toward those goals as opposed to like how many likes your Facebook post got, because your control over that is pretty minimal.
Yeah, I would say for those of you who are into sports, it would be like an assist, right? Mm-hmm. Like social media should be an assist to your larger organizational goals and your website goals. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good analogy, because, you know, social media is one of those things that is, you know, you have to be there, but it's misunderstood and it changes so much that it's hard to keep track on everything that it is that you need to know specific to it. And so, you know, your website, you're right, is kind of that tell-all of where you really want to drive people when you're in the digital space. So, you know, we've talked a lot about like, you know, engagement and conversion, which are really, I think, two of the most important topics that, you know, when you're talking about digital, those are the two things that you want to try to accomplish. I'm a nonprofit. This is all new to me. Like, where do I start? Like, what do I do next? I'm kind of just starting to understand this digital stuff. What do you think I should be doing?
Mm-hmm. I think that gets us into talking about tools. And thankfully, there are a lot of free tools out there. Google Analytics is a free tool, and it is probably the #1 analytics platform out there. You can use it mostly for your website, but there are ways that you can pull data from your email marketing or your social media. You can pull that into Google Analytics. But some of the ways that you know, you can learn more about analytics, Google has a free analytics academy that you can go through, and they, you know, it's you'll watch instructional videos, and then at the end there's different like levels. You can take their beginner. I would start at the beginner level if this is all new to you, and then you can take a test at the end and become certified. So I would say there's probably 20 to 30 hours worth of education that they offer there, even just in the beginner course for free. Another tool to use would be Webmaster Tools. So Google has kind of a suite of tools that are free. And so Google Search Console is one of them, as well as Bing kind of has their, they call it Webmaster Tools. And it's similar to Google, only it's on Microsoft Bing platform. And then Google Tag Manager, which I would say with a caveat that if you are new to Google Analytics, don't even think about Tag Manager for now. I mean, know that it's there, and it can definitely be something that you can grow into and use in the future, but it's a very technical tool and it takes a lot of time to learn. So I would suggest getting familiar with Google Analytics and the reports, because there's a lot of reports even within Google Analytics. So, you know, get a feel for your way around in the reports for Google Analytics and all the data that you can look at and analyze. And once you're feeling comfortable and confident with Google Analytics, maybe, you know, adding a free tool like Tag Manager.
When I think, you know, too, when you're digging into analytics, it's always important to go in with your goals in mind. And we've already talked about that. I mean, we've mentioned it, you know, that your macro conversions are tied directly to the goals that you have as an organization. Usually when we sit down with clients, and Amy, I'm sure you have a very similar process, so you can jump in as well. But, you know, we always like to ask clients, you know, what are they doing to strengthen the foundation of their organization? Like, what's that major objective? You know, is it to launch, you know, a new program? Is it to, you know, sustain and grow the one that you have, or, you know, whatever your objective is? Then you set goals so that you know you're moving toward that objective. So, you know, does that necessitate a certain amount of donations, you know, a certain percentage increase from last year? It should be something numerical so that, you know, when you look at data, however you're looking at your data, because some of you might actually even, in addition to Google Analytics, you probably have lots of data in your, I'm thinking of your donation management system, whatever you might have. Blackbaud is one that I'm most familiar with, but I know there's more out there, so you can come at your data with those goals in mind, knowing, what you need to accomplish, and then how does your marketing align with that? So, I mean, if your goal is, to grow donations by, a certain percentage, then your marketing, whether that's online or offline, and hopefully they're integrated together, that marketing should be helping you move specifically toward that goal. And so that's, when you approach your data, be thinking about those things.
Yeah, and I would stress that, because I mean, there's so much data.
Yeah.
And you can collect so much data, and you could spend so much time analyzing that. If you don't have goals that kind of help you focus in on specific metrics that really matter, like you can spend a lot of time. And I know, obviously, we talked at the beginning, time and resources are limited. So, making the best of the time that you have really stems from setting those goals.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, I think we all have a tendency when we try something new, it's like, okay, we have to go all in. And if we're going to invest all this time, we have to do all this. I mean, I think it could be even, the goals don't have to be super massive goals. They don't have to be extensive percentage increases. I mean, you may want to say like, okay, we want to increase overall web traffic by 1.5% over the next quarter. And these are the 5 things that we're going to do to push more people to our website. And then maybe you just say like, okay, is anything working? Is anything not? And maybe just start, really small, instead of trying to say like, okay, we need to increase donations by 15% across all digital platforms with an integrated thing. And you've never even really spent a lot of time looking at your email and some of that information that might be really helpful. I mean, do you guys have any thoughts on like kind of some ways to really dip your toe into the water as opposed to going all in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with expectations, right? So with organic, so the unpaid side of digital marketing, that's kind of a long game. And so it's important to kind of look at results over time. Hopefully you're going like incrementally in the right direction, but also don't abandon ship before you give it time. So, give it some time. If you're doing, like, let's say you're doing a blog series, initially you might have some traction if you put, a newsletter out and you include a link to your blog. You might have some initial traction, and then it might fall off if you're not, sharing it on social media or something. But, one blog post is not going to be enough over time to see a large increase. You got to continue kind of, maybe weekly or monthly, supporting that blog post with other like social media promotion, like I said, or and continuing to write other blog posts on your website.
Or repurposing that content in another way, through a webinar into your email. I mean, that's another piece that we've mentioned about your email, and, obviously using your earned audience, your email subscribers, to the best of your ability is, another way.
Yeah. And then you should start to see kind of the buildup, of those efforts over time, but it will take time. Especially if you're in a very competitive space. I haven't worked a lot in nonprofits, but with the clients I've worked with, like, if it's a very competitive space, like plumbing, right? Your efforts are going to take a lot longer than if you're in a non-competitive space. A lot of our, manufacturing clients aren't, they're not as competitive. There's not as many of them. So keep that in mind too. If you're in a space that's very competitive, just know it's going to take more time.
And I mean, patient. And I can add to that, like in the nonprofit space, I mean, like healthcare is a great example here in Northeast Ohio. There's a lot of, you know, healthcare providers in this area and some really amazing ones. And so, you know, in the healthcare nonprofit space, like that takes time that's going to take a long time to come to fruition, just because it is highly competitive.
And I know we're not here to talk about content today, but I think both of you made the point about, you know, repurposing content. Don't be afraid to repurpose content. I mean, I think people are like, oh, I can't put that out there a second time because we already did it. Especially when you're talking about social media, even your e-newsletters. We repurpose content all the time just because we don't know when a particular audience may see something. And so, or when they don't. I mean, we have as good of analytics as we can, or sometimes we repurpose things if something is relevant again. So, you know, maybe you are in the healthcare space and there's I don't know, a topic that's not COVID. Maybe it's Heart Disease Awareness Month or something, and it's Heart Month. And so maybe you have some content that just is evergreen that you can continue to use and maybe just need to refresh. I think nonprofits as a whole are always like, we always have to have new, always have to have new. Always look at ways you can repurpose what you have, and because you probably have an arsenal of content that you can use.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think it's important, like you said, like we kind of talked about earlier, about how much that we can't control in, you know, in the social media space, and we can't really control how long that long game is going to take. So, you know, focusing on the things that you can control, like repurposing that content, you know, looking at, you know, I think one thing that we talk a lot of times, another thing we talked about how some clients get very fixated on bounce rates. Another thing that clients get fixated on is their most visited pages. So they're in analytics and they're looking at their most visited pages, and they're like, oh, you know, what does this tell me? Well, you know, I feel like, Annalisa, you could speak to this because it comes up a lot. So it's like front and center when you log in.
Yeah, so again, I kind of think if you can step back a little bit and look at the bigger picture of things, having your goals set so that you know, like, are those actually the pages that we want people to visit the most? And, you know, if they're not, then, you need to kind of go back to the drawing board and kind of change your approach or pivot. And so, yeah, I mean, going in and just opening the report up, it's really hard to just open the report and say, oh man, like these are our top 10 pages. These are our most important pages. Well, no, not necessarily. They're just the pages that get the most traction as far as traffic is concerned. And again, knowing what your goals are, you can say, okay, well, those are not the pages that we want, or some of those are the pages that we want, and kind of go from there. So one thing that we always say is that data shouldn't drive your strategy, that it should assist
or inform it.
It should inform your strategy.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So you know, you talk a lot about comparison over the long term. So it's probably a little bit more like investing in the stock market. You're not going to day trade. You're actually in it for the long term, kind of thing.
Great example.
Great
yeah,
example.
Sure. Parallel.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the paid side of search, and that's kind of the short game. Like, that can fill you in for, you know, if you're just starting up your kind of organic search presence efforts, you know, supplementing with paid can help if you have the resources. The thing to caution is don't put all your eggs in that basket, just because as soon as you shut off your ads, well, your traffic, I mean, it might not stop, but it will definitely decline.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that a lot of, not all nonprofits, but many nonprofits do have the Google Ads grant. And so I do know that, nonprofits do sometimes get into that paid space. I guess maybe I'll just briefly off topic, just say to definitely learn that space, because it's very complex. It's as complex as Google Analytics. and then make sure that it's tied to your Google Analytics so that you know that it's functioning the way it should. So that was sorry, a little off topic.
If you are using it, Google has some free tools to help you manage it. Yeah. And if you aren't, check into it, because you might be able to get some free grants for advertising.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that's probably one of the things people will ask a question about, because I think some nonprofits are a little bit more familiar with the Google ad grants and not. And just since we are on this topic, have you seen any nonprofits that have used that grant and what are some things that maybe they have used that grant for? Because it's pretty sizable month over month.
Yeah, I think it's up to $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
A month.
A month.
A month. Yeah. Which is a lot of money to manage. Like, we're working with one nonprofit right now, and like they're doing a lot of brand campaigns, which is great, but they're not nearly maxing out their budget because they don't have any campaigns that are non-branded.
What does that mean?
So
I'll encourage you.
Branded campaigns obviously are going to have, any queries with someone searching, including the name of your organization. And non-brands are going to be, maybe they're talking about the services you offer, or it's something that parallels what you do, or it intersects what you do.
So it could be, so let's say somebody's looking for mental health agencies in Northeast Ohio. That may be something that a mental health agency might use a Google ad grant for, because they're in a space that's more, broad, and that people might be searching for as opposed to, XYZ agency, because I don't want to promote one over the other, but, as opposed to XYZ agency mental health services.
Yeah, and I guess to go back to conversions, and Amy, you asking, if you're using a Google grant, how do you use it well, or, how have we seen people use it well? Again, going back to conversions, like what conversions do you have set up? And those should go back to kind of the why of your advertising. So if you're advertising for a specific cause, like a specific campaign or something, then you do want to track conversions. If your campaign is just like raising awareness about your brand or your organization, you may not have those hard conversions. You might have more of the like, hey, we're seeing traffic, and this traffic compared to other mediums, like if they're coming from search, or they're coming from social, or they're coming from your email newsletter. How does that traffic compare to other mediums? Are they, spending more time on your site? Are they visiting more pages? Or even if they're just kind of compared to your organic traffic, if your organic traffic does well, and your paid traffic, does equally well, that's great.
And I think that's the thing about conversions and about tracking the data, is there's no like right or wrong way to go about it, or I shouldn't say right or wrong way. There's probably not a set way that you go about it for everything that you do, right? So if you're just trying to let people know that, let's say you are a mental health provider in Northeast Ohio, as opposed to you want people to come to, your organization for the specific service, and you want them to sign up, or you want them to make a donation or something. Those are very different measurements that have to be done in different ways, and you're going to be looking at that data very differently.
And actually, I will throw out one other thing that I think you guys could look at, and Annalisa, you'll have to jump in on this because this is not my area of expertise, but like the branded searches, like and specifically, I know we've been talking about ads and raising awareness, but we haven't even touched about how privacy laws and things are changing data. And I feel like that's like a whole separate conversation that we don't need to get into. But I mean, privacy is changing the way data is collected. And but one of the best ways to see if awareness about your organization is growing is through watching your branded organic. And so I don't know if you want to like mention that briefly, because I think it's important.
Yeah. Google Analytics used to show like search queries and traffic coming from specific queries. They don't anymore. However, the Google Search Console tool that I mentioned briefly does allow you to see queries that people are using. And so that's one way to look, again, looking at a specific time or comparing it to, you know, the same time period the previous year. You can see specific pages even, and like queries that people are using, and, you know, when Google is showing those pages in search.
And so, yeah. So obviously one micro goal that you might have is, you know, when you think like, you tell somebody, oh, we want to, you know, one of our goals is to increase brand awareness. Well, one thing that you might look at is that metric in Google Search Console to see if, you know, year over year, yeah, more people are typing our name into a search engine because they know us. They saw us on a billboard. They heard us in a radio ad. They may have seen our search or Google search ad or whatever. So.
Yeah, and I would say, I guess the one metric that would show in Google Analytics that would kind of correlate would be direct traffic. So people coming directly to your website, not using search to find you. They either have you bookmarked or they type you directly into the browser and come right to your site.
Right. So if you're seeing a nice increase on that over time, you know that you're doing something to get your name out. You're doing something well that is making people more aware of who you are. So.
Even that can tie back to like billboards or you know, doing events in the community offline.
And that might be one of those situations where you see the spikes, right? Where you may have a billboard campaign, so you're seeing spikes to a particular page, or you might be seeing spikes to a particular area. Whew. So we can find so much information that can tell us. So what do we do with it once we have it?
Yeah, so one of the great ways to kind of tie this all together, I feel like, you know, looking at the data that matters to you, you can create, and they have templates already that you can maybe find a template with the data that you want. They have Google Analytics offers custom reports or custom dashboards. And so you can pull the data into one spot that you want to look at. And so I think, you know, if you can set up or use a template that they have already, pulling in the data that matters, I think that could give you a place where you can just go at any point in time and look at your metrics. You can change the date ranges to do comparisons. And then, you know, keeping in mind, hey, this is a long game. You know, we have to give it time to take effect. Keep checking back. You can, you know, when it's a custom, if it's in a custom dashboard, that data just updates automatically. So, you know, you can come in every week and look at it and say, okay, like we're incrementally moving in the right direction, or you might see that, you know, what you're doing isn't working, and that's okay, totally normal. I mean, not everything that you do is going to be a hit, or it's going to be, you know, a home run. So you have to make adjustments. And again, not letting the data drive that, but letting it inform what you're doing and your strategy moving forward.
And I think I'll add too, coming from a previous nonprofit job, you know, having a dashboard is extremely important. A custom dashboard can be very helpful, because I wasn't even in analytics, you know, once a week. It sometimes was, you know, once a month. And I was like, okay, where is this one metric? And then you waste all this time trying to figure out where that one important metric was. When you have a custom dashboard, boom, it's right there. So at least I don't know if anybody else ever has that experience out there, but that was my experience. All the time.
Well, and you know, using dashboards is just a really good, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just really good practice anyway, whether you're looking at a digital, digital information, or a dashboard that you're using to collect information on, you know, your programs or your fundraising or other marketing that you're doing, because it really gives you some clear picture of, as you said, you know, measuring the things that matter to you. And what may matter to one nonprofit may not matter to another nonprofit. It just is how are you going about doing things. And then, you know, I think to Jen, to your point is, you know, establishing some regular times to look at your data. I think, you know, and I will say I'm guilty of it as well, not as guilty as I used to be, but, you know, not looking at like website traffic and where are people coming from. And, you know, now again, as you mentioned, this is not, you know, the business, the B2C people have been doing digital really well for a while. It's, you know, nonprofits are, and even B2B, it's a little bit more of a new revelation to people to be doing a lot of this. So I guess it's, you know, having that dashboard is a great starting point for you. So the one thing you did say when we were preparing for this call today, and I don't remember which one of you said it, but you know, you did say let the data inform your strategy, not dictate it. And then you also said don't follow the data where it's going. And I can't remember in what context that was. Do you guys remember talking about that? And if so, talk through that a little bit, because I think data can be informative yet misleading at the same time. So I think that might have been what you were referring to.
Yeah, and I guess I can't stress that focus on your goals enough, right? So, you know, if you're looking at your goals, you can really go back to the data and say, okay, like I'm going to look at this specific data and I'm going to, you know, instead of, you know, jumping into to opening up Google Analytics and the first report that opens and you're like, oh, like these numbers, and they just like suck you in. And you start to like, you know, go down the rabbit trails and chase data and be like, oh, well that, you know, there's literally just so much data to look at that if you don't have that focus, you'll find yourself kind of chasing the data versus, you know, allowing your goals and your strategies to focus your efforts in analyzing your data. So.
Well, and I think I was trying to remember the conversation, Amy, too, and I wonder if we were, I think maybe we were talking about, you know, again, if you have an action that you want somebody to take on your website, and you know, maybe the data shows that they're doing something else, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, that's what they came there for, that's what they want to do. It could be like the way your website is laid out. It could be, you know, it could be that giant orange button that's less important than the green button down here, right. But people are clicking on the orange button because it's in their face, you know what I mean? So it's a whole perspective of like, back to your goal. Look, I want them to click on the green button, not the orange button, but everybody's clicking on the orange button. So that maybe not necessarily like chasing the data. It could be, I need to swap out, I need to make a change on the site so that people are doing what I want them to do or whatever. So I would think maybe that was kind of where we were talking about. I don't remember.
Yeah, I know when we do, you know, when we do an optimized page, not the website as a whole, but a specific page, you know, one of the things in that optimization process is always, what's the purpose of this page, right? And so when you determine what the purpose of the page is, you have to like look at it from a user standpoint. And sometimes that's really hard, right? Because we're on our websites all the time. We see our websites all the time. And, you know, it's an internal thing for us. We can't always step outside of it and see the big picture. But, you know, if you can get in the mindset of doing that when you're running a campaign or you're doing a piece of content or creating a new page on your website, you know, what's the purpose of this page? What do we want the user to do? And is there a clear path for the user to do that?
So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, and I think that's really helpful. It's a really good way for us to look at it. And I agree with you that, you know, it's like anything, when we're close enough or too close to something, sometimes that clouds our ability to see what somebody from the outside sees. And so, you know, being able to step back and ask ourselves those questions is certainly very helpful. So we are actually getting toward the end of our time together today, but in our last few minutes, I would like to just have everybody, if you have questions, please put them into the chat and Q&A. But as we're wrapping things up today, I'd like to just ask you guys kind of for your final thoughts about digital data and, you know, some last minute recommendations that you might have for folks today.
Yeah. Focus, right?
Yeah, focus is a huge thing, right?
Make pivot tools.
Using tools to your advantage with those goals in mind so that you can focus your efforts.
Recognize it's okay to, when data's not, you know, when data's not going in the right direction, use it as an indicator that you need to make some changes. And
or give it more time.
Yeah, great. Well, actually, great point. I don't even know if we got the log game. Yeah, so remember that, you know, maybe it's going to take a little time to gel. You know, and just trying to think if there's anything else. Just, I mean, back to let data inform your strategy, not dictate it. So I don't know, kind of like just a wrap up of the key points.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, the one great thing about digital marketing is you get the data piece. You know, the traditional side is necessary, and it still has its place, and it's still important to your overall goals as an organization. But the nice thing about digital is you can track some of your efforts and say, hey, is this doing what we kind of intended it to do?
And I will say to your point when you're talking about the Google Analytics Academy, I know a lot of people don't go into Google Analytics. It's on their site, but it is overwhelming. But the Academy stuff is very, very good. And it's a really great way to help you understand just the basics of it. And, you know, so for those who, you know, have a little bit of time or want to make some time to understand their digital data better, it's a great way to be able to do that. So. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us today. And I know that data isn't always the most, you know, engaging topic, but really, you know, it really does, as you say, inform and should be able to inform our decisions. We did get a quick question that came up when you used content. Oh, this was just a question about content, actually. Jen, I'll direct this to you, is when you use content again and again, do you rephrase it and do you directly requote it? So this is repurposing content, quick question.
I think when you are moving in completely different platforms, I think you would absolutely, you know, I wouldn't necessarily rephrase it. I might requote it. So, you know, if it's, you know, in your email newsletter, I mean, you may not want to put the whole article in there, but you might want to give that intro and send them. You know, if you're doing a social media post, absolutely, you can use, you know, directly pieces and parts of it. The only thing you don't want to do is create multiple pages on your website with the same exact content. That's definitely a no-no. But otherwise, I would definitely feel comfortable, like in different marketing spheres or areas, just using that content, you know, again, just as you had it. Amy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Amy, you probably have something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in terms of repurposing content, you know, the content itself, you know, everything, really a lot of what I think everybody should do, drive people to your website as much as possible. And then that way you don't have to change that content, but how that content may be pushed out on a social media post may sound differently than it sounds in an email. But if you're running the same social media post, there's no problem whatsoever of copying the exact same social media post. So I think just factor in like how you're actually doing that content. You know, you may have an e-newsletter that goes out to donors, and then you may have one that goes out to program participants. The article may be relevant to both of them, but the lead-ins may be different just to appeal to those particular audiences.
Great point. As soon as you started down that path, I'm like, yes, of course, audience.
Yeah, audience is a whole different discussion that we won't be talking about today. But But thank you again to both of you. And before we head out today, we just want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk about our coffee shop upcoming webinars. We're actually at .org going to be taking a few months off during the summer, and we're going to be starting our webinars again in September. So we'll be sending more information out in August about what we're going to be doing. We're excited about what we're going to be doing for the fall. Over time, we're going to continue to, have our blogs out for you, our monthly newsletter, and all those other kinds of things. But we're going to take a little summer break and give you guys a little summer break from webinars as well. If you do have questions, I just wanted to put up Annalisa, Jen's, and my information. So if you guys do have questions, that information is there for you. So we are at 3 o'clock. Oh, yeah.
Can I just jump in and say those actually aren't our email addresses? So I think that was.
Oh, no. Oops, we missed Jen. So, oh my gosh, we had a little, I apologize for that. So it's Jen at Data Dames Marketing, it's datadamesmarketing.com, and Annalisa at datadamesmarketing.com. And I apologize for that. We had a little typo there, but that is their pictures. That's really who they are. All right, well, thank you everybody for participating today, and we will hopefully see you again in September.
Thank you.
Have a great summer. Thank you.